Not going to stop the share, but I'm going to set this stuff to share. For now, we've got it plugged in. We just have to get these things coordinated here. Right there.
You know, even if you're not in the Zoom meeting, you still get the benefit of trying to figure out the technology for 10 minutes. There you go. So fascinating as it is, I'm gonna just start with a little bit about what the program is about today. We're gonna talk about a new way of thinking about our yards and gardens as a bridge to the natural world. Rather than a sort of dated idea, in the past, we've often used our gardens as a sort of outdoor decorating. But this is a way to convert, we're talking about ways to actually convert your property and give some suggestions of native plants that thrive in our environment. I know that Fran was going to talk about native plants, so it's similar, but I was supposed to talk in May and we just switched dates. I'm here representing, let's see if this is working. I'm here representing the Master Gardeners of Cape Cod. It's a cooperative effort between volunteers and the Cooperative Extension staff to provide science-based horticultural information to the citizens of Barnstable County. We help others learn to grow, you see our motto there, through a number of activities. We have a demonstration garden at the Barnstable County Fairgrounds that anyone is welcome to visit. We do talks in the evening throughout the summer. If you feel like driving to Nashville in the summer, nice. A demonstration. We have a children's garden in Brewster where we work with grade school students, and we offer half-day seminars in the spring and the fall. The one coming up next is at the end of March. We're having Doug Ptolemy, who has written several books on why native plants are important to the biodiversity of our environment. He's going to be our main speaker, and unfortunately, I hate to tell you this, but it just closed out. So you probably can find Doug Ptolemy online, and I'll be doing some quoting of Doug Ptolemy because he is a big name in the native plant movement. But basically, the Master Gardeners program is about offering information on sustainable and environmentally sound gardening practices. So, I think everybody has heard a lot of discussion lately about native plants. I'm going to give you a quote from the U.S. Department of Agriculture website. There are many benefits of landscaping and gardening with native plants. They include conserving water, protecting soil from erosion, creating habitat, and providing food for many different animals, including birds, pollinators, and small mammals. Simply by growing native plants, gardeners can bring enormous beauty to a community and joy to its residents. In addition, native plants are easy to grow and require minimal maintenance. I have to say, when I was preparing this talk this last week, I was thinking about the beautiful islands that you have off Route 6. Any of you involved in those islands? Yeah. Well, native plants, I was thinking that native plants would, you wouldn't be plugging as much water.
You like a lot of water.
Exactly. Right. They are beautiful and they make everybody happy. So, with all the talk about native plants, there are a number of definitions of native plants floating around. So I'm going to tell you what I'm using as my definition today. And that is that native plants are local to their region before the introduction of European and Asian cultivars. They can include a broad variety of plants, and I will be showing you some examples at the end of the talk. A native plant is a plant that is a part of the balance of nature that has developed over hundreds or thousands of years in a particular region or ecosystem. Speaking of ecoregion, we are Atlantic pine barrens. And at a recent talk, our Cooperative Extension agricultural agent talked about it, and he said some of you may have trouble with your gardens because the ecoregion soil is 80% coarse sand, mildly to extremely acidic, excessively drained soil, low water holding capacity, low nutrient holding capacity, and low organic matter. Sounds like an ideal garden environment. I know we all laugh when we hear that. And yet we do have a number of native plants that do thrive here. Talk a little bit about the whole idea of biodiversity. It's another thing we're hearing mentioned a lot with the native plants. And it means the number and variety of living things in a specific region. Understanding our local ecology allows us to create a biodiverse buffet rather than an ecological desert for the pollinating insects that support our local environment. Insects and caterpillars eat native plants. Birds need protein from those caterpillars. I was really surprised to learn that there are a number of birds that do not eat seed at all. They have to have the protein from the caterpillars to thrive. And then birds distribute seeds on your property, pollinate plants, and are eaten by small animals, and that goes on up through the food chain. I love that picture. So Doug Ptolemy is a tireless advocate for native plants, and he explains food webs, excuse me, like this. No, why I'm so proud of that. I don't want all of you clearing your throats for me. Plants are capturing the energy from the sun, and the plants capture the energy and turn it into food that supports the rest of life on Earth. If you don't get that food to the animals, you don't have any animals, and then biodiversity crashes. You don't have functioning ecosystems without that whole plant to animal transition. Insects are the primary dispersers of the plant energy, and not just any insects, it's really caterpillars that dominate the process. Caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So although we humans are not particularly fond of having caterpillars eat our plants, we need to seek a larger food web and realize that the whole food web is supported by those caterpillars. Because native plants are so well adapted to climate and soils where they evolve, they're generally much easier to care for once they are established. They need little or no pruning, deadheading, watering, or fertilizing. Think about how large lawns and showy exotic plants demand high levels of fossil fuel use, fertilizers, pesticides, and supplemental water. This makes natives a less costly option in the long run. Site your native plant in a spot that provides the conditions it prefers. That's soil type, amount of sun or shade, and it will thrive. It's always important, however, to remember that mantra of right plant, right place. You put a shade-loving native in the full sun and it's not going to thrive, and vice versa. So this diagram, I really love these pictures. I have a couple of these diagrams. This diagram provides a good explanation of why and how native plants require less water. Because they evolved in our climate, they thrive in our weather pattern of sometimes very heavy rain and occasional drought. As we've seen over the last 2 summers, it's becoming increasingly important as we see our climate becoming warmer and generally drier, certainly in the summer. And they are predicting another dry summer this summer. I just heard that the other day. So that's one comparison of roots. And this one is the one, that's turf grass, what we have in most of our lawns. And this is the native grass. Amazing. So if you're considering creating a rain garden to capture and disperse water on your property, create your rain garden with natives. As you see here, the root systems stabilize and hold the soil. Choose plants that tolerate fluctuating water levels, such as blue flag iris, cardinal flower, great blue lobelia, and false boneset. Some sites are dominated, Some sites are dominated by non-native grasses and tend to have thick, mat-forming root systems with lots of thatch and residue on the surface. In that situation, aggressive site preparation is needed before sowing your tiny native seeds into the prepared soil surface. The only place I've ever really seen this done, the Association for Cape Cod along Route 6A did this on their property in front of the house they have there, because they wanted to establish a rain garden, and they wanted to get rid of the plants that were there before they planted their native plants. It's important to know from the onset that it may take many years for native plantings to look attractive. It takes time for native plants to get established. Those roots I just showed you, they need a few years to grow. Trees and shrubs need time to get established and mature before they'll flower and bear fruits. In time, the plants will spread and propagate, creating a pattern that works well and fills in your space. Some of the native perennials can take up to 3 years before flowering. And funding is a consideration because it isn't exactly cheap to buy locally adapted native seed, as well as other materials that you need to prepare your site. I'm going to show you many different ways to prepare your site. But the time and expense are spent in preparation can yield a sustainable garden that will provide beauty and enrich your landscape for years to come. Another way to prepare your yard for replanting or just a patch of yard is to lay down cardboard or layers of newspaper on the grass and cover it with at least 3 inches of fallen leaves or 3 inches of bark mulch in the fall when the grass is in the process of dying back. And then after about 3 months, you remove, when the grass is dead, you remove that and you leave the newspaper and remove the mulch. If you use cardboard and the cardboard disintegrates, that's fine. It disintegrates into the ground. Just remove any large intact pieces. You can set the mulch aside to be used later, but move the mulch to the side and add topsoil so that your ground is level with the surrounding area. If you don't want to go through this process of killing the roots of the grass and thatch, you can just dig up your lawn. Dig about 2 inches down to remove the grass and the roots. Remember the roots of the turf grass that I showed you before? Well, as you pick up the turf grass, you only need to go a couple inches down and then hand remove any grubs to prevent them from eating the roots of your new plants. And if you want to support the biodiversity network, you can put those grubs in a cup for the birds to get later. But as you develop the garden, toss any remaining grass roots. Or, this is your fourth option, some people just move to mowing less frequently. Many times landowners don't have the funding or the labor hours to create a from scratch pollinator habitat. They're interested in helping the pollinators, but they're looking for a little more casual way to do it. And it is, if you have a large property, it's much more affordable. If there's already the beginning of a decent pollinator habitat in the system, another option is to just change your mowing regime. And that could be as simple as to mow it during the summer, but then leave it during the fall, and wait until there's been a frost or two in the autumn. Over time, the existing flowering plants that are already present in the soil will begin to increase. However, whatever you do to prepare your landscape, it's really important to remove the invasive plants. In a recent talk, someone described invasive plants as aggressiveness in perpetuity. Right. I have a lot of English ivy on my property, so I particularly appreciated that kind, which I am steadily fighting, and I think I'm starting to win finally. The invasive species are widely considered to be the second worst cause of ecosystem function degradation. The first is habitat loss. However, invasive species and habitat loss often go hand in hand. So these are a couple of ones that I have in my yard. Because the ground covering vine that smothers anything in its path, English ivy has been linked heavily to a loss of plant diversity. Winter is the time of year that English ivy makes its presence known because it remains green throughout the winter. And the second one here is Japanese hops. And that seems to be increasing, and I think it's also easier to remove, because I got rid of that pretty quickly. But it's an herbaceous annual vine, and its leaves, as you see, are a simple opposite, heart-shaped, and usually divided into those 5 lobes. The flowers are greenish, bloom mid to late summer, and the growth on that one is rapid. The vines quickly climb over adjacent vegetation, and by the end of your summer, they can be up to 35 feet in length, which blanket the nearby vegetation. And this happened on my property. I had a job where I was working off Cape, so I was leaving before the sun came up and getting home after the sun set. So I only worked in the yard on weekends, and it looked like, all I could think of was Sleeping Beauty. You know, it was like these vines just took over this one hillside behind my house. It was unbelievable, but they're all gone now. So this is a fairly shallow rooted plant that if you do your work of pulling it up, you can get rid of it. It took me about 3 years to get rid of by pulling it up by the root, the English ivy. But I have seen some of it where it doesn't come back anymore. So I can tell you there is hope. But it is important to get rid of these invasive plants. We do have whole presentations on removing invasive plants, but here's a quick summary. Be sure your nursery purchases are non-invasive species when you acquire plants. And if you have a regular nursery that you work with, ask them to sell only non-invasive plants. Number 2, seek out information on invasive plants. You can get information from botanical gardens, horticulturalists, conservationists, government agencies, and the Native Plant Trust. I have a folder here that people can look at that shows invasive plants and native plants. You know, things that are similar that you might want to plant instead. I have a couple of these, one from the Orleans Conservation Committee, and one from the native plants. And of course, this is our local native plants from the Orleans Conservation Committee. And then volunteer at local parks and nature areas to help them get rid of invasive plants, because these things spread on the air, and the birds obviously spread them too. So having them anywhere near your property means that you're going to see them soon. I think that's how I got that Japanese house. Okay, so when you want to begin this project, you want to get to know your site. Many factors are going to determine what kinds of site preparation that you need and what species you need to use in your garden. Look at your existing plants. You may already have native plants that are desirable for that site, and native trees. Be sure you're not removing the native plants that are already acclimated and thriving into your yard, because you've got the root system going. And note your sun exposure. How much sun is there and how long is the site exposed to sun? Over 6 hours is full sun, 3 to 6 is partial sun, and under 3 is shady. So that helps. And then you need to look at your soil type. Is it sandy, clay, loam, or peat? You could have your soil tested for acidity at the Master Gardener's Horticultural Clinic in Yarmouth, or you could send it off to the University of Amherst Extension Service, and they'll do a full analysis for $15. Ours costs $2, and theirs is $15, but they give you a lot more information about the organic content and what kinds of minerals you might need to add to your soil to amend it. So watch your soil's drainage and see how it's doing with moisture. Does your soil hold the moisture? Is it dry? Does rain soak in and then run off? Or does the rain, when it rains, does it seem to stay there? And is it wet? Some soil is actually really wet and really holds the moisture. Clay soil can do that. And there are veins of clay soil on the Cape, so. And then look at your neighbor's natural vegetation. Determine whether your planting is going to negatively influence wild native plants or be influenced by nearby weedy exotics. Plan your native planting to harmonize with adjacent areas as much as possible. Finding other areas with similar conditions to yours and studying what's growing there is another approach. Resist trying to modify the conditions of your soil. You can fertilize, you can amend, you can irrigate, but it's a lot easier to plant plants that are naturally going to thrive in your soil, and it's really hard to change what you basically got. So you may have heard of Piet Oudolf, the Dutch landscape designer who did the High Line in New York. Has anyone here been to the High Line? Yeah, yeah. His whole thing is working with native plants. And he points out that flowers fade. So he chooses plants more for their shape and texture than for their blooms. So he thinks about stripped bare stalks, stems, and seed pods, and they become your architectural elements in the garden. He says perennials fall into two categories: structure plants and filler plants. The difference between the two is that structure plants provide clear visual interest until the autumn, whereas filler plants are only used for flower or foliage color, and they become formless or untidy after midsummer. So they're going to have their bloom and then they're just going to fade. You know, they're not going to add much to the garden after their bloom period. So he says about 70% of a garden should be filled with structure plants, and the other 30% can be filler. For structure, choose repeat bloomers, long season perennials, and grasses. He also recommends a very dense planting pattern so the ground is covered, and that helps to prevent the need for watering in the soil. And then, I love this. He suggests planting in 30s instead of 3s. The thing I grew up with was always plant 3. Well, he says plant 30, you know, get it really dense. So a good matrix planting depends on background plants that are visually quiet with soft colors and without striking form. This is a quote from Udo. Grasses are an obvious choice. They can occupy the space for a long period of time, year-round perhaps, without having to be replaced. Within that matrix, plant a few visual trees that will bloom in succession over the course of a year. Include soft background plants like grasses or 3 to 4 varieties of larger plants that bloom at different times to be interspersed with native bushes. He recommends small plantings when you start so that the roots are better established. Rather than planting something that's more mature, start with the smaller plant. And then the roots are better established and they're more acclimated to interacting with each other in the soil. Planting in the wrong season for a species can cause unwanted weeds to create complications, with competition that discourages proper root establishment. Many undesirable weed species tend to grow and produce seed during the spring and summer, so lots of wildflowers can be established after the heat of summer declines, and then you need less supplemental irrigation for them. Another thing that's going to come up once you start looking for native plants is whether it's a straight native or a nativar. A cultivar developed from a native, that's what a nativar is. So let's take echinacea as an example. Echinacea coneflower, probably one of the best known of the native flowers. It comes in purple, pale purple, and yellow. But the hybridized echinacea can be red, orange, pink, green. I even have one that's kind of green and pink within each petal. You know, it's beautiful. But what besides color makes those coneflowers different? Well, there's sometimes a downside to engineering the plants over the original native. The native coneflowers are excellent food sources for pollinators, but sometimes we don't know if the jury's still out on the hybrids. We do know that the echinacea with double and triple blooms are useless to the pollinators because they can't get to the nectar and pollen. However, some preliminary studies on this subject suggest that the single-flowered hybrids are as attractive to pollinators as the parent plants. Also, some hybrid varieties are sterile and they do not produce viable seeds. Some of us count on the plants producing seeds so that they'll spread and continue to grow in our garden. We don't have to buy new plants every year. Because of the way hybrids are developed, either by tissue culture or cuttings and divisions, it means they're genetic clones of each other, and they do not contribute to genetic diversity within that plant's gene pool. Less genetic diversity means that the next generation is going to be more at risk for disease and decay. So that's another thing to think about with the nativars. And one of the ways you spot a nativar when you're buying plants, see these quotes? The names of the nativar are always put in quotes, so you know that that's not the native plant, that's something that was developed from a native plant.
Are there any natives that actually have a name? I don't think so.
They'll have the biological name,
Right,
like this is the
right,
genus
it'll
and
only be
variety.
that, but
Right.
I.
It'll have a variety name, but the variety name, if it's a nativar, if it's a hybrid, will be in quotes. That's the difference.
Yeah,
So we, Heather Holm, who is also one of our experts on native plants, says we especially want to plant plants that are known as keystone plants. Keystone plants are native plants that support a significant number of caterpillars. Planting keystone plants helps build that complex food web by forming the essential foundation, native plants and insects that provide food for other organisms directly and indirectly. I'll show you where, at the end of the talk, I have some of my sources, and I'll show you a list where you can find some natives for our area later. I'm using a native plant list in my talk from the Hyannis Country Garden, their website has a list of natives for our area. And then you can also look at the Cape Cod Pollinator Pathway, and the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension also has a list of native plants. But here are some that I like. I like the false Solomon seal. This is a native plant in our area. I think it's particularly a beautiful bloom. I think that it would be considered a filler. And then this is the fringed bleeding heart, which is a really different variety. That's the native variety of bleeding heart. And it just grows totally differently. It only gets about this high, but it's really pretty. It likes the shade. I've put it around the trees on my property. So here's some other information about some of Massachusetts native plants. And of course, we start with the Mayflower, which is the Massachusetts state flower. The trailing arbutus, or Mayflower, is a low-growing evergreen plant with woody stems that spread along the ground and produce pink or white flowers in the spring. The flowers are typically about 1/2 inch in diameter and have 5 petals. It thrives in acidic soil, you'll hear this again and again, and partial shade, and is often found growing under trees and other shaded areas. It's known for its ability to tolerate cold temperatures. And unfortunately, it's now disappearing. It's becoming very endangered, and it is protected by Massachusetts law. But the reason it's disappearing is because it's very sensitive to environmental disturbances. Since the flower is sensitive, it can be a difficult flower to cultivate. Pearly everlasting, the next one, is a member of the aster family. It's herbaceous with soft green stems, leaves die back to the root each year, and the plant gets its name from the small pearly white flowers, which bloom from late summer to early fall. And they are arranged in a flat top cluster, and they have a long flowering period, which makes them a popular choice for flower arrangements and dry bouquets. Pearly everlasting is often found growing in open sunny areas. It's one of the rare native plants, the wild plants that like full sun, meadows, fields, roadsides. It's a hardy plant, and it can tolerate a wide variety of soil conditions, including dry and rocky soils. The plant's also drought resistant and can withstand long periods in the dry winter. Number 3 here is the red maple. a deciduous tree native to Massachusetts. The red maple draws its name from its beautiful fall foliage, which turns bright red and orange. It's a hardy tree and it can tolerate a wide range of soil conditions, and it can grow in full sun or partial shade. The tree is tolerant of wet soils also, and it's often found growing in low-lying areas or near bodies of water, although I don't particularly associate with that. I see it in the woods, which could be damp or peaty even. Ebony spleenwort is an evergreen fern native to North America. It's also native in Europe and Asia. It's a member of the spleenwort family, known for its delicate lacy fronds. It's a versatile plant that can tolerate many different conditions from full sun to full shade. Often found growing in rocky or gravel. If you have a rock garden, this is a good plant for that. Particularly well suited to growing on cliffs, ledges, and walls. The plant's root system is made up of rhizomes, so it has the horizontal underground stems that allow it to spread and form clumps. Another native, although it's not a Cape Cod native, but it does well here, is the trumpet honeysuckle. It grows quickly and easily, and it really attracts hummingbirds, bees and butterflies. My sister has one by her house, and it's fun to watch the hummingbirds. They really love it. The next is black chokeberry, a deciduous native shrub. It's named for its fruit, which is not poisonous, but it's very astringent, so it isn't something that people like to eat without a lot of sugar being added. The shrub is green, glossy leaves, clusters of white flowers in the spring with blackberries following the flowers in the fall. And the berries are a favorite food of many birds. Mace sedge, the next one, is a species of flowering plant in the sedge family. It can be found in wooded areas, fields, and wetlands across Massachusetts. But this particular one does not like our dry, sandy soil. So we have another one that we grow here on the Cape, which is Pennsylvania sedge. So you would want to look for that if you're growing it here. Even though it's a bit smaller, Pennsylvania sedge is still valuable because it provides cover for migratory birds as well as habitat. And it's an important host plant for butterflies and moths. Birds eat the seeds, and it's a fantastic ground cover, and it's drought tolerant. And number 8 there is black cohosh, a member of the buttercup family. Black cohosh is a tall, erect plant, with clusters of small white flowers that bloom in the summer. The plant gets its name from the dark, nearly black color of its underground stems. Some plants that tend to bloom in the midsummer. Udo recommends when you're designing your garden, you want to keep it simple. You want 2 or 3 layers. The idea of layers is to help the eye, and I had not ever seen this before, but I like this quote: read the confusion of leaves and stems in front of you. You know, we always see those layered gardens, but I thought that was a nice way to explain why we do that. Evergreen shrubs, tall grasses in the background, perennials in the foreground, is enough to create distinct visual focal points. And these are some favorite summer bloomers that could add that front row. And then these are fall bloomers. They get their name, the asters get their name from the Latin word for star, and their flowers are considered the superstars of the fall garden. Some types of this native plant can reach up to 6 feet tall, with flowers in white and pink, but more striking in rich purples and showy lavenders. And then the other one there is Joe Pye weed, which also blooms in the fall. And it's considered crucial for pollinators because as the other plant flowers are gone in the fall, they need a source of nectar and pollen. So it's good to have your plants. Not only is it enjoyable to have plants that bloom into the fall, but it's really important, particularly for the bees, to have plants that'll go into the fall like that. And Udolph would call this a structure plant because Joe Pye weed can reach 5 feet in height. And here are some native grasses. I think we've all seen these. Native American beach grass is a cool season perennial bunch grass that grows about 2 to 3 feet tall and spreads vigorously by rhizomes. It's often planted in the fall. It's native to our sand dunes. It adapts to heat, wind, arid shifting sand, and salt spray. And the reason we see it a lot is because it's very good. The roots can trap and stabilize the dune systems. And so I think that it's often planted by local conservation groups. And one stalk planted in a well-prepared field can yield up to 50 stems in one growing season. So it spreads pretty well. Switchgrass, the second one here, is a tough ornamental grass that stands up to a variety of harsh conditions. It adds texture and color in the garden. Grasses really move in the wind, so you really get, they enliven a garden, and then they change it with the sun as the grass moves. Switchgrass spreads slowly over time, adds stunning vertical accents whenever it's planted, and it's a warm season grass that blooms mid to late summer. Some varieties have foliage that change color in the fall. When established, switch plants are divided every 3 years, and if their other needs are met, they can survive for 15 to 20 years. So, you know, if you're looking to not rebuy plants a lot, this is a good one for the back row of your garden. I'm sure you've also seen this shrub on our local beaches. Tried and true native that tolerates our conditions is the northern bayberry. Bayberry can grow 5 to 10 feet tall and wide. It's a deciduous shrub, prefers full sun to partial shade, and it loves our acidic soil. It's hard to find a nursery that will identify the male and female bayberries, but if you want to produce the bayberry fruit, you have to have a male in the group. So it's worth asking. This is the berry that's used in our candles and soaps that we hear about, and it's also very attractive to the birds. Here's another popular bush plant. This is the ninebark, a member of the rose family. It's a large shrub, and it bears tight clusters of small white flowers. It thrives in dry to moist conditions with rocky or clayey soils at the bases of bluffs, bog margins, and it likes full to partial sun. Other common names include Atlantic ninebark and Eastern ninebark, but don't confuse the native ninebark with the cultivar red wine. One of my master gardener friends put a red wine ninebark in her yard, and she says that it repels bugs. So it isn't supporting the biodiversity in her yard at all, which I think is what she was going for. It's a beautiful bush though. I'm going to talk just about a couple of trees. My own favorite is the tupelo or black gum tree. It's a wonderful fall accent. It's just beautiful in the color. And it has a pyramidal shape. It has high wildlife value as the fruits are useful for birds and small mammals. And the flowers are important because they bloom early in the spring. And this particular tree is good for European honeybees, which are also something that's becoming extinct. So we try to support the bees. And this bush, the first time I saw this was at the Native Plant Trust Garden near Framingham. Their specimen was very mature and it was gorgeous. It was as tall as the ceiling in this room. The white fringe tree, it's a beautiful tree. It likes marshy conditions. And it's characterized by its beautiful white flowers, which bloom in May to June. The tree also has small olive-like fruit, which develops in August or September. It's deciduous, so it loses its leaves in the winter, and that exposes the smooth gray bark. In the late spring, the fragrant flower clusters with creamy white fringe-like petals. I bought one when I saw it because I just fell in love with it. It's like this. It's like there's a solid piece and then the petals just hang down from the solid part of the flower. It's very different from anything I've ever seen. And I was totally intrigued by it. And then in the fall, the leaves turn a bright, clear yellow So it's pretty in the fall landscape. And then the bark has that scaly brown ridges, and that's pretty in the winter. And although the one I saw was really tall, the bush that I planted has not grown rapidly, so it stays bush size for a long time. It's very slow, mature. And then I think everybody in Eastham has seen the white cedar trees, because we have, of course, the white cedar swamp trail here at the National Seashore. These trees are a native of our eastern shore, and the wood is very resistant to decay. The trees buried in peat bogs for decorations for decades, have been recovered, and they're still in excellent conditions. So if you haven't seen them, take a little walk on the Atlantic White Cedar Trail at the National Seashore, and it's fun to see them because there's a lot on the ground too. So some final thoughts. Low maintenance does not mean no maintenance. The first growing seasons, especially for native plants, will require maintenance. Develop a plan that takes the factors into account that you need to do the weed control so that the fast growing weeds don't overwhelm your plantings. There's a variety of weed control methods. I've talked about me. I have to admit, I go back to just pulling them up by the roots. It does work. And then another, if it's a big area, plan to mow the weeds before they reach 6 to 12 inches. And for trees and forest plantings, weed control and protection from wildlife is often necessary. I have those little, like the chicken wire cages. They're like little bell-shaped chicken wire cages that I put over almost everything new that I plant. I don't think I've ever done a gardening talk where people haven't asked me about rabbits and deer. I mean, they just, they're voracious. I planted native asters in my yard. I can tell you the rabbits love them. None of them survive. So you do need to somehow protect them. Yeah, they are. They're brutal. I used to like rabbits. I can remember about 3 summers of fighting the rabbits, and I thought, I now sympathize with Farmer McGregor. Forget that. It's funny. So it does take, you need to protect them from the wildlife if you want them to survive, unfortunately. And again, the native plants roots take time to establish, and it may not appear that your plant is succeeding unless you understand those long roots I showed you take some time to develop. But if you're continually vigilant during the first season and ensure the native plants become properly established, and you get rid of the weeds that are going to choke them out, they will self-perpetuate, and they'll discourage the weeds on their own once their roots become established. So for further information, you can visit the Pollinator Pathway of Cape Cod website, because they do definitely have native plant lists, and they have a link. Their link is to a list of eastern temperate forest climate zones. So what I showed you before, the Atlantic coastal, that's more specific to us. The eastern temperate forest climate zone is much bigger, so you'll want to remember that we here are in the 7A growing zone. So some of the plants that are on that list don't do well here. And then they also have a section on converting your lawn and converting your yard with links to how-to sites. So these are the resources that I mentioned that I would show you that I used when I was developing my talk. One other thing I wanted to mention is, and I am not a member, the Harwich Garden Club every year has a sale where they sell what they call Harwich Gold. It's cow manure that's been allowed to sit, and they sell blocks of big bags of the manure itself, and then they sell jugs of the runoff water from it. And I forgot to ask her to, but I'll ask her to run off a bunch of these so that you guys can take them if you want to. They do it once a year, and you have to have your order in by March 21st, and then you have to go pick it up either April 4th or April 5th, but I buy it every year to replenish my raised beds, and then I use the liquid on my roses actually. So you might be interested in that opportunity. And I also have a sheet, if you would like to be added to the Master Gardeners mailing list. We have an email list, and we notify people of things like these. We do the spring symposium every year. We do an autumn joy program. They're half-day programs. They're about 3 hours with speakers on all kinds of gardening topics. So that might be something.
Isn't Doug Talame coming
Say
in
that
March?
again.
Doug Talame is gonna be there in
Doug
March.
Talame is coming at the end of March.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, and that one just closed out.
Oh.
I maintained the website, I had to put it up, so I got the news that it just happened, I just added it to the website yesterday. We went to a bigger hall, we went to the Harwich Technical School, which seats 250 people, because we wanted to get as many people in as possible. But it's a great opportunity to see, for sure. So, questions, comments? Have I overwhelmed you?
Will those talks be available on Zoom from, that's all sold out?
Those
Will they
talks.
have a Zoom?
Oh, no,
Traffic,
there, no, we don't, but a number, if you look under his name on YouTube, there are a number of his talks on YouTube,
Oh,
but
okay.
we are not Zooming our conference, we talked about it
Hmm.
several times. But the expense of creating it,
Hmm.
outweighed the fact that so many people can get at it on YouTube, that we just decided that we wouldn't do it.
I know you mentioned this Commodore, but do you use anything else to enrich your soil?
It's first time viewing.
I said, I know you mentioned this Commodore. Do you use anything else to enrich? your
Oh, yeah.
soil?
Oh, yeah.
Like, what are some top
A
things?
good thing to realize is that organic, the master gardeners really favor organic, gardening methods. And I use organic fertilizer because it's a more slow release than a synthetic fertilizer. So I have different parts of my yard, with different needs. And I particularly use that manure in the beds where I'm gonna plant my tomatoes.
Okay,
And I use the liquid, and I use a slow release fertilizer, which I put on once a month for my roses.
okay.
But then I have a front bed that, you know, I haven't changed that soil in years, so I try to put some of the Harwich Gold in it every year to add more, you know, more mineral content to it, basically. So that it's a more richer soil. I mean. Yeah.
If you have permission, is it, effective to transplant natives from one place to another?
You can, the Mayflower is protected, so you're not supposed to do that, but you can. I have a friend who has been doing it for years, but they're really, you have to be so careful, and you really need to replicate the conditions they were in. But yes, you can, but then, and you need to water it a lot. Some of the stuff I was reading said you should be watering it like every other day for the first few years, just to help those roots make the transition.
I noticed that I have some milkweed popping up, right? That's the monarch butterflies really need that.
Right.
Do I do anything to it or just let it like be?
I would let it be.
Yeah, but it's in the middle of my blueberry plants.
It's in the middle of the.
One of them is, yeah, it's actually doing better than the blueberries, but I didn't know if, if I add like stuff for the blueberries, is that gonna bother them?
Oh, no, I don't think it'll bother it, but you know what I would do? I wait until the fall when you get
The pods.
yeah, and then I would take it and put it where you want it.
Oh, okay. It's popping up in a couple of different places.
Yeah.
And I even saw a caterpillar.
Good.
Yeah, I don't know if a bird ate it. I didn't know what to do, if I should try to save it and like take care of it myself, and I'm like, I'm gonna kill this.
I have a friend who, it's not the mama one, but there's another one that she's researched, and she has a little house.
I know, it is so much
To really protect them.
Yeah, yeah.
She was on hydrangea tour one year, and I was working in her garden, so I saw this whole project. She has little kids, and she really wanted them to see the whole
Right,
process.
yeah, yeah. I was really excited to find that little caterpillar. I wasn't sure what to do about it, you
But
know?
where there's one, there's probably more.
I hope so. I only saw one, but he was really pretty.
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
I do have a few, well, what about shrubs? It seems like when you go use flowers and trees and there's so few shrubs.
Well, I planted that, my hillside, my problem hillside. I planted some bearberry on that last summer because I figured it would stabilize and it would be resilient enough to fight the ivy. And that really, I got rid of the Japanese hops, thank goodness, but, there's quite a few shrubs. If you look at these lists and they're broken out, so you can look for shrubs. But yes, there's a lot of, there's a lot of shrubs that can get quite big. And it depends, they can get quite big. So you might not want them to be quite big. But my fringe tree, I bought a little one, it was about that big, and it's really only grown a few inches, and I've had it for 4 or 5 years at least.
And is it in both sun or what?
It's at a sunny place, it gets the morning sun. And then I think by late afternoon, it's shaded by a tree that's nearby, so it probably gets a full 6 hours though. Because it gets the morning and then the midday in the summer, in the winter, of course, the midday.
The sun.
It goes fast in the winter, the sun. Any other questions? Comment? All right, well, thank you, and I'll put this, I'll go right now and ask for to get copies of the Harwich Gold, and I'll put the thing to sign if you want to be added to the Master Gardener's email list, which doesn't go to anybody but the Master Gardener secretary to add to our email. If you want to sign up for that, I'll put it there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's something to plan. Yeah. Oh, no, because he's always the guy. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's a single focus, and when it comes home, all he wants to do is eat and like train for whatever is next. His biography. Oh, yeah, no, he's, he did, the Martins was where we had there on last evening. And yeah, next weekend, he does amateur swimming at Harvard. More power to him. Keeps him out of trouble. Oh, yeah. Wants to be outside. Like the ground is hard. You shouldn't be big if they want. I will remind you. Oh,
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Let me stop this.
I've just finished my test. Remember the John.
Oh, yes.
I'll get it for you. Okay. So this is right.